Hello and welcome to another episode of Codo Cinema, the podcast show where I talk about movies. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codo Man. Well, here we are, part 2 of Barbenheimer. And to conclude the two-part special of Codo Cinema Barbenheimer, I'm going to talk about the Christopher Nolan biopic Oppenheimer. Now, before I break down the film, let me give my background on the production of Oppenheimer. The Oppenheimer film is based on the 2005 biography American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin J. Sherwin. The film chronicles the career of American physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer. The story predominantly focuses on Oppenheimer's studies, his direction of the Manhattan Project during World War II, and his eventual fall from grace due to his 1954 security hearing. Now, following the 2005 publication of the biography American Prometheus, director Stan Mendes, who was one of the original directors of this film, who was going to direct this film, was interested in adapting the book into a film, although the project failed to materialize, and the book was optioned by various filmmakers over the next 15 years. Which also brings in Christopher Nolan to direct the film. Now, the film itself has an all-star cast that includes Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Florence Pugh, Matt Damon, Kenneth Branagh, and Robert Downey Jr. The film itself was filmed in a combination of IMAX 65mm and 65mm large format film, including sections in IMAX black and white film photography. Nolan also used practical effects and minimal CGI, or computer-generated imagery. Oppenheimer is distributed by Universal Pictures instead of Warner Bros., and the reason behind it because of Nolan's disagreement on how Warner Bros. Was going to release their 2021 films on HBO Max at the same time as in theaters, and failing to communicate with anyone, including the cast and crew involved with the 2021 films that were going to be released in theaters and online at the same time from Warner Brothers. So Christopher Nolan has done a lot of films with Warner Brothers, most notably the Dark Knight trilogy, Dunkirk, and of course a few other films as well, including Tenet and Interstellar. There are some of Christopher Nolan's films that he did with Warner Brothers, including Inception as well. So this is the first Christopher Nolan film to be distributed by Universal Pictures. The film was released on July 21st, 2023, the same day as Barbie, which received critical acclaim. Now, for Oppenheimer, the film itself also received critical acclaim as well. Now, basically going into the film, how is this film receiving critical acclaim? Well, because obviously, first of all, come on, it's Christopher Nolan. You know what he's gonna, you know what Christopher Nolan's gonna bring to his films. Of course, it was praised for the cast performances, particularly from Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, and Robert Downey Jr. Screenplay, the direction for Nolan, cinematography, including the musical score by Ludwig Göransson as well, especially the sound designs and visuals. Some critics called it Nolan's magnum opus, and has frequently been cited as one of the best films of 2023 up to this point. Now, like I said, this came out the same day as Barbie, and Barbie has already made over $1 billion. And as for Oppenheimer, so far it has made over $800 million. So Oppenheimer's coming up a little bit close up there. So there's something right there. So there's something right there. And the film's budget. Now the film's budget in the Oppenheimer. Now the film's budget is $100 million. That's the budget of the film. And so far it has grossed over $800 million. That is huge money right there for Christopher Nolan. Well, not as huge as the Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises, but at the same time, it's getting up there. So, with that being said, So with that being said, let's conclude the two-part Barbenheimer special for Codo Cinema by breaking down the Oppenheimer film. Also, spoiler alert. Now, the opening of the film shows a fiery explosion of the atomic bomb, and for the most part, it is a haunting opening, haunting and emotional opening as well, because you're seeing like fire, a fiery explosion, which resembles the atomic bomb. That it resembles the atomic bomb, but also at the same time you have Ludwig Göransson providing an emotional music background, especially from the string section as well. Like what you hear in the background from Ludwig Göransson is emotional music, as it shows like it really captures the emotional aspect of the film, which does lead into Oppenheimer's regret as well, like his full on regret. Now, flash forward to 1926, 22-year-old doctoral student J. Robert Oppenheimer, being played by Cillian Murphy. He's in Cambridge, who looks down on the ground in the rain with rain droplets hitting the puddles, creating small waves. Now, now that moment right there, where Oppenheimer's looking down at the puddle while it's raining, and the rain droplets are hitting the puddles, creating small waves. That is a symbolism of the shock waves of the atomic bomb. So there's your little symbolism right there, if you know what I'm saying. Like the rain droplets hitting the puddle, creating small waves, symbolizes like the shock waves of the atomic bomb. Now, J. Robert Oppenheimer, who's in Cambridge, studies under experimental physicist Patrick Blackett at the Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge. Now, for Oppenheimer suffers from homesickness and anxiety and struggles during the required lab work. Now, another reason behind it is that Oppenheimer is upset with Blackett, with the demanding Blackett, like he's demanding, Blackett gives out too many demands for Oppenheimer, and what Oppenheimer does is he leaves him a poison laced apple for Blackett. Now, that's true. That's true because in real life, when Oppenheimer was in college, Oppenheimer Oppenheimer put in the apple some type of poison. Now it's very unclear what the poison was in real life, but in the movie it turns out that Oppenheimer was using like a poison laced cyanide, that like he uses a poison laced cyanide and puts it in the apple. So that was what was used in the movie. Now, in real life, as I mentioned, we don't know a lot of people don't really know what what the poison was in real life. I mean, but for the movie, it's basically a poison laced cyanide that was being injected into the apple. But unfortunately, fortunately, Oppenheimer was able to retrieve it, only for visiting scientist Niels Bohr, being played by Kenneth Branagh, who comes to visit and is impressed enough by Oppenheimer's intellect to recommend that he should study theoretical physics in Germany, where Oppenheimer completes his PhD. Now, now of course, Niels Bohr was holding the apple in his hand. He was about to eat it, but Oppenheimer smacks the apple out of his hand. To to this, Oppenheimer smacks the apple out of Bohr's hand. To the surprise of the three in the room. Now, now Niels was close to eating the apple, and Oppenheimer smacking the apple out of Niels' hand, like he while he was that's just a life saving moment. But at the same time, and let me tell you this, um, in real life, Oppenheimer in real life, the university found out about the poison laced apple. So apparently, Oppenheimer was almost expelled. He almost got expelled from the university. So and this basically brought into the attention of Oppenheimer's parents, who intervened to prevent Oppenheimer from being expelled. So the young scientist was put on probation and sentenced to mandatory psychiatric counseling. So so in real life, Oppenheimer almost got expelled in real life for putting in the poison laced apple, and the university found out about it. Nobody ate that apple. Nobody ate the apple, but they found out. But they found out about it, and Oppenheimer was almost expelled. He was placed on probation and needed to go to mandatory counseling. Now, Oppenheimer returns to the United States, wanting to expand quantum physics research in the United States. He begins teaching at the University of California, Berkeley, and the California Institute of Technology, starting with one student. He meets his future wife, Catherine Kitty Pewing, being played by Emily Blunt, who is a biologist and ex-communist. So Oppenheimer was met met his future wife, met his future wife Catherine Pewing. But before that, um, Oppenheimer met Jean Tatlock, who's being played by Florence Pugh, and Jean Tatlock is a member of the Communist Party USA. Now, um, Oppen, interesting enough, um, Oppenheimer and Tatlock had a relationship. Yes, Gene Tatlock and Oppenheimer had a relationship. Like in real life, Jean began to see Robert Oppenheimer in 1936 when she was a graduate student and Oppenheimer was a professor of physics at Berkeley. And and as I mentioned, Jean was also a member of the Communist Party for the U.S. at the time. At the time, and they started a relationship, but also at the same time, Tatlock struggled with her sexuality at that moment as well. Also leading to a moment where we're also leading to a moment where Jean was showing Oppenheimer a Sanskrit "I am become death," which is basically the famous quote that Robert Oppenheimer says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Like the destroyer of worlds. Wow. I mean, words like that. I know some people may say no words describe that moment, but hearing this, hearing this quote, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," from Robert Oppenheimer, that really says something. And of course, this moment came when Oppenheimer was sleeping in bed with Gene Tatlock. And yes, Oppenheimer did sleep with Gene Tatlock. Well, in the film, Gene showed Oppenheimer the Sanskrit of the fame of this famous quote from, forgive my mispronunciation, Bhagavad Gita, which is basically the Sanskrit that Jean had in her hand in the film, with that quote, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." That really says something, right? That really says something right there. So so then so then later on, Oppenheimer obviously will obviously meet up with Kitty, and Kitty was married to was a married woman. So Kitty was married to Richard Stewart Harrison. Kitty married Robert the old-fashioned way, by Robert getting Kitty pregnant. So yeah, wow, that's pretty messed up. Yeah. Yeah, wow, that's yeah, wow, that is. Oh, yes, yes. So, wow, Oppenheimer with Gene Tatlock, and now with Kitty. Wow. Yeah, yeah, wow. Woof, woof. But Robert Oppenheimer did it the old-fashioned way, I guess. Woof. Oh, wow. Yeah. Oof. So for Kitty, now Kitty divorced her husband Richard Stewart Harrison, and the divorce itself was finalized on November 1st, 1940, and Kitty married Oppenheimer the following day in a civil ceremony in Virginia City, Nevada, with the court janitor and clerk as witnesses. Now, as for Gene, so you're probably wondering what happened with Gene Tatlock. Well, as I mentioned, she met Oppenheimer while she was a graduate student, and Oppenheimer was a professor at the time in Berkeley, and Jean struggled with her sexuality to the point where she thought she was a homosexual. Although logically she can't be due to her, although logically she can't be due to her unmasculinity. Now, of course, the film does go back and forth between everything that's going on, from Oppenheimer's relationships with Gene and Kitty to the building of the atomic bomb, including the government side of things, where we see Robert Downey Jr.'s character, um, and his character's name is Louis Strauss, and and Louis Strauss, he played a huge role he played a huge role during the whole atomic bomb situation, and one of the original members of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, and he served as the commission's chairman in the 1950s. He played a major role in the development of the nuclear weapons after World War II, nuclear energy policy, and nuclear power in the United States. Now, now of course, he is one of the main driving forces behind the controversial hearings for J. Robert Oppenheimer. So there's something right there, and and now going back to now going back now go now basically um going back to the film. In 1938, Nazi Germany's progress in nuclear fission research spurs Oppenheimer and his colleagues to replicate the results. Leo Szilard and Albert Einstein then write to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning of the atomic weaponry's catastrophic potential. And in 1942, amid World War II, U.S. Army General Leslie Groves, and Leslie Groves, general, is being played by Matt Damon, who is an officer and the director of the Manhattan Project. And this is where he leads the Manhattan Project to develop an atomic bomb after Oppenheimer's assurances that he has no communist sympathies. Oppenheimer, who is Jewish, is particularly driven by the Nazis potentially completing their nuclear weapons program, headed by Heisenberg. Oppenheimer assembles a scientific team including Edward Teller and Isidore Isaac Rabi in Los Alamos, New Mexico, to secretly create the bomb. Now, the town itself, Los Alamos. Now that was a built set. They actually built the set. There's not that many. There's not a whole lot of CGI in this movie, to let you all know. Like when it comes to Christopher Nolan movies, like you know that Christopher Nolan's gonna go for like for a practical route. And of course, there's probably going to be some CGI, a little bit of CGI. Like he uses very little CGI a lot of his movies. Like very little, mostly practical effects, very little CGI. And of course, the town itself, Los Alamos, is a built set. And and of course, Oppenheimer also collaborates with scientists Enrico Fermi and David L. Hill. He and Einstein discuss how an atomic bomb potentially risks triggering an unstoppable chain reaction that could ignite the atmosphere and destroy the world. Now, for the first 2 hours of the movie, like we go into the one, well, actually in the first 2 hours, in the first hour is just basically Oppenheimer's part of Oppenheimer's backstory of him going to college while also meeting up with Gene Tatlock and his future wife Kitty. Like, and then the other hour is just, and then the second hour is just basically going into the process of building the atomic bomb. And that's literally like that's like you're in the 2 hour zone right now. Like the second hour is just basically the building of the atomic bomb, and it really does show. And Christopher Nolan does a pretty good job with it. But it also does go back and forth between Robert Downey Jr.'s character and the whole discussion of the atomic bomb as well. And on top of that, when we get to the moment where we get to the moment where they're gonna test the atomic bomb in Los Alamos, like we see like it was done during the night. It was done during the night. Well, actually, not well. Technically, it was done during the night, but it was also done very early morning, dawn, when the sun was set. The sun was still set, and this was like after a rainstorm. And of course, this leads up to a moment where everybody started to move far away. Everybody who's about to test the bomb started to move out of the way, go for cover, get on the other side. This was done in an open field, by the way. They did the test, the atomic bomb test on an open field. Now, what really happens is everybody was trying to go for cover. One guy was inside a car, and of course, like when somebody was asking, like, "What's going on?" And this other guy was like, "It's a windshield wiper. UV rays can't get to me in through this." And then you have one other guy who's sitting in what looks to be who's sitting in a chair, starts putting on sunblock and wearing goggles. And then the person who dropped the bomb. Now, the person who dropped the bomb is the person who pressed the button to drop the bomb, and that person was Kenneth Bambridge, who is a physicist who was the director of the Manhattan's Project Trinity nuclear test, and he was played by Josh Peck. Josh Peck played the guy who pressed the button to drop the atomic bomb. And of course, once it happened, you see the explosion, the fiery explosion, and it's silent. You hear nothing. You hear nothing after after the drop, after the drop and the hit. You hear nothing for a little bit. On top of that, and even before that, the music from Ludwig Göransson adds the suspense of what we're going to see in this moment, the dropping of the atomic bomb. Like the music builds the suspense leading up to the final moment when Kenneth Brambridge dropped the bomb. Like when Kenneth Brambridge pressed the button to drop the bomb. When the bomb was dropped, you hear nothing. You hear nothing. Because they're out in they are far out they are far out from the danger zone. They are far out from the danger zone. Like so many miles and yards from that zone. Like you see a fiery explosion until the moment where the shockwaves come in, boom, boom, you hear the explosion. And and this was done using some visual effects. Like Christopher Nolan recreated that moment for the viewers to see, and he done it so well. And everybody even cheered from the moment that like this was a success. They did it. Like they did. So this was a success. They were able to create a weapon. They were able to create a weapon that could ignite the atmosphere and destroy the world. Then later on, after Germany surrenders, some project scientists question the bomb's relevance, and Oppenheimer says the bomb will end the war in the Pacific. The Trinity test is successful, and President Harry S. Truman, who's being played by Gary Oldman, orders Hiroshima and Nagasaki to be bombed, forcing Japan's surrender, and Oppenheimer is thrust into the public eye as the father of the atomic bomb. Wow, I mean, quotes like "I am now become death, the destroyer of worlds," and of course another quote, "Father of the atomic bomb." Do you know how? Do you know those types of names like that? You don't like think about it. Like for someone who has created a weapon like that is crazy to be called someone like that. Father of the atomic bomb, or even I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. Those two quotes is basically Oppenheimer himself who created the weapon, the weapon that literally took out Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And 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 with that from Oppenheimer himself, that is that is that is that is like that is history coming to life. That is history coming to life. Wow. Now now of course now of course we get to now of course actually well now of course you're all probably wondering, well, why am I okay? You're all probably wondering what happened, what happened after that. What's the end result of all of this? Well, for those who know your history, for those who basically know your history, and I'll admit I'm not a huge history buff. I'm not a huge history buff when it comes to going into history, but Oppenheimer, when Oppenheimer was presenting his speech inside a school, he envisions the aftermath of the atomic bomb. And you're probably wondering, what's going on? What does he see? He sees a woman's face peeling off, white flashes, people screaming, and you even see dead bodies disintegrated. You even get a what sounds like a train chugging its way to the station, but no, it's actually the people stomping their feet. Like you hear you hear the chugging sound in the background. That is a good sound effect right there. Like that's a good sound effect that Christopher Nolan used in the film, like a chugging sound effect that almost sounds like as if a train was chugging by, but um it's just basically the people's feet stomping on the ground. But it does add to the tension. It adds to the tension and suspense of the atomic bomb as well. Now, of course, Oppenheimer and Truman met at the White House, and as I mentioned, Gary Oldman plays Truman, and I will admit, Gary Oldman playing Truman, even though it was a cameo, it was actually pretty good. In fact, my little brother went to see this movie, and when it got to the part where Oppenheimer talks with Truman, he was like, "I know that guy. I know this Truman, but that guy looks familiar. How do I know this guy?" Well, it turns out it's Like I said, it's Gary Oldman who plays Truman in this movie, and Gary Oldman has played Commissioner Gordon in the Dark Knight trilogy from Christopher Nolan. So Christopher Nolan knows his actors very well when it comes to collaboration as well. Even Kenneth Branagh as Niels Bohr. I know Kenneth Branagh wasn't in the film as much, but he did a good job. This is also Niels Bohr does appear before the testing of the atomic bomb. like he realizes, like he knows something's going on. He knows that Oppenheimer is about to do something that would change the world. He knows something's up. Even Albert Einstein himself as well. Now, of course, going back to Oppenheimer and Truman, Oppenheimer urges Truman to restrict further nuclear weapon development. Truman rejects Oppenheimer's advice, considering him weak. And when Oppenheimer leaves the office, Truman even calls Oppenheimer a crybaby. That's true. Truman called Oppenheimer a crybaby because Oppenheimer is now regretting the decision of dropping the atomic bomb because it killed a lot of people. Of course, this leads up to the end of the 2 hour mark that goes into the last hour of the film. The film, like, this is a 3 hour film, by the way. Like, Oppenheimer is a 3 hour film. This leads up to the last hour of the film where Oppenheimer is now facing a hearing. Now this is the Now this is basically the Oppenheimer security hearing, and this took place in 1954, which is basically a 4 week hearing conducted by the United States Atomic Energy Commission, which explored the background, actions, and associations of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the American scientist who had headed the Los Alamos laboratory during World War II, where he played a key part in the Manhattan Project and the development of the atomic bomb. Now, this whole hearing that was going on in the film resulted in Oppenheimer's Q clearance being revoked, and it also marked the end of his formal relationship with the government of the United States, and it generated considerable controversy regarding whether the treatment of Oppenheimer was fair or whether it was an expression of anti-communist McCarthyism. As I mentioned, there is definitely mentions of communism in this film, and of course, this whole hearing was organized by none other than Louis Strauss, who is basically being played by Robert Downey Jr. And I'm going to tell you this: Robert Downey Jr. He did a fantastic job playing Louis Strauss. Like, this is one of his first films to appear in a long time. He appeared in, like, his one of his latest films that Robert Downey Jr. appeared was the Doctor Doolittle movie Doolittle. That was one of his latest films, and that film came out in 2020. And now 3 years later, he plays Louis Strauss in Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. And I will say this: he did a fantastic job. To be fair though, he did exploit Oppenheimer's past associations with Communist Party members. Like, as I mentioned, Kitty and Jean were definitely members of the Communist Party, although it was mentioned that Kitty did it was mentioned that Kitty did was a part of the Communist Party, but now she's considered an ex-communist. And speaking of Jean Tatlock, it was also brought up that Jean Tatlock took her own life in 1944. So what really happened was, and this was brought up during Oppenheimer's security here during the whole testimonial during this whole ordeal, that Tatlock experienced clinical depression at the time prior to her death, and she and Oppenheimer met up at a hotel room for the very last time, and it was during that scene where Oppenheimer and Jean Tatlock were basically seeing each other one last time. Now, of course, to mention this, yes, yes, it is a very Oppenheimer and Jean in that scene. They were both nude in that scene. Like they were both not wearing any clothes. But for what I found out in another version for another country, in another version in another country, a CGI dress, a black CGI dress was put in for Gene Tatlock during the during the hotel during the hotel room scene where Oppenheimer and Tatlock are having their final conversation. Now that scene that edited scene where Florence Pugh has a CGI black dress, that was that is played in the Indian and Middle Eastern countries for their movie theaters, and that's and I don't know the reason behind it. I don't know the reason by how. Well, actually, the reason behind it is because India and the Middle East don't allow that type of content to play in theaters. So like most movies that feature explicit sex or nudity, sources close to the film confirm that some scenes that featured Oppenheimer and G Tatlock being nude, like those scenes were censored to secure a release in countries such as India and the Middle East, which don't allow that type of content to play in the theaters. So that's the reason. So that's basically the reason behind it. And I didn't know about this. I didn't know about this whole ordeal prior when the film was first released. I mean, I didn't know about this. But of course, going back to the film, after the final conversation, Jean Jean took her own life. Like what she did was she 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 submerged her head in a bathtub filled with water, and of course she has a pile of cushions in the bathroom, and she submerged her head in the party filled bathtub, and there was an unsigned suicide note, and and that's basically what happened. And of course, her father found her dead dead with her head submerged in the bathtub. That is that is so sad. That is so sad. And this the whole entire situation was brought up during the whole security hearing. Even Kitty heard of it. Even Kitty realized this whole situation too. Like there was even another moment where it's a vision, where it's a vision of Jean and Oppenheimer making out with each other as if they were doing this as if they were doing this in real life. And what I mean by doing it, I am talking about doing it. If you know what I'm saying. And they showed that. They showed that whole vision of Kitty seeing her vision of Jean and Oppenheimer with Jean sitting on top, sitting on Oppenheimer, and they're both nude. Like, and this is just a vision, by the way. This was just a vision, by the way. And it's so messed up. It's a messed up moment, knowing the fact that that the whole security hearing that they brought up Oppenheimer's personal relationships. That is messed up. Of course, leading up to leading up to different moments where, of course, this does lead up to this does lead up to a moment where where Strauss Senate's confirmation, where we see Strauss at a secretary hearing, where where this is a confirmation hearing for Secretary of Commerce. Hill testifies about Strauss's personal motives in engineering Oppenheimer's downfall. Now, this is Hill. Hill, like his name, like Hill's first name is David. So David L. Hill, and he's a nuclear physicist at the Met Lab who helped create the Chicago who helped create the Chicago Pile, which is basically the world's first artificial nuclear reactor. Now, David L. Hill is being played by Rami Malek, and he testifies about Strauss's personal motives in engineering Oppenheimer's downfall. And the U.S. Senate votes against Strauss's nomination, and Strauss privately rants. Strauss privately rants that Oppenheimer schemed against him. So technically, yes, was plan. Oppenheimer's made a huge scheme. Like Strauss might have, even though Strauss destroyed Oppenheimer's reputation, but Oppenheimer came back to have the Senate vote against Strauss's nomination. Even Strauss's assistant, and Strauss has an assistant, and his assistant is being played by Alden Ehrenreich. Now his assistant now Alden Ehrenreich's character. He's a fictional character who is an aide during Strauss's nomination for United States Secretary of Commerce. He appeared throughout the majority of the film. Now the scenes between Oppenheimer and Strauss, like Strauss's scenes are mostly black and white, which included Alden Ehrenreich's character. The same and Oppenheimer's scenes are in color. So I like that little bit of a connection right there. I like that little bit of I like that continuity right there between Oppenheimer and Strauss. Both actors, so Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr., they played their characters very well. They did a fantastic job. I believe Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr. they might get Oscar nominations for this role. Those two definitely deserve Oscar nominations right there. So you're probably wondering, okay, what happened to the whole ordeal? So what happened to the whole ordeal? How did it end? So what happened to the whole ordeal? Well, it turns out of course, Oppenheimer lost his security clearance for lost his security clearance for in the government and policy. He became an academic exile, cut off from his former career and the role he had helped to create. But the reputation of those who had testified against Oppenheimer, they were tarnished as well. Though Oppenheimer's reputation was later partly rehabilitated by Presidents John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. The brief period when scientists were viewed as and I quote, public policy priesthood, and ended and thereafter would serve the state only to offer narrow scientific opinions. Scientists working in government were on notice that dissent was no longer tolerated. Now, of course, this leads up to the ending where President Johnson presents Oppenheimer with the Enrico Fermi Award, which was presented in 1963 as a gesture of political rehabilitation. It is also revealed that Oppenheimer and Einstein's earlier conversation was never about Strauss, but the far-reaching implications of nuclear weapons. And Oppenheimer fears the nuclear age could potentially ravage the planet. And the film ends with a close-up of Oppenheimer's face, all depressed. The music from Ludwig Göransson's playing in the background as the camera even slowly zooms in for a little bit on Oppenheimer's face, all depressed, and then it cuts to black, and that's it. That's the end of the movie. That's the end of the movie for Oppenheimer. And holy smokes, that is something. Now, now I will say this: I actually enjoyed this movie. For the most part, it was a very good film, and I really enjoyed this movie. Now, a lot of people said that this film should have the film should have stopped after the top dropping of the atomic bomb. Now, to be fair though, I can understand where some people were saying like this is where the film should have stopped. It should have stopped after the whole dropping of the atomic bomb. But of course, when you really think about it, the film is based on Oppenheimer's life of how he started and where he is after the atomic bomb. Now, now I can understand why Christopher Nolan went with that because if history if for anybody who remembers the history, uh, the whole the whole security hearing with Oppenheimer did play a huge role, especially with the whole atomic bomb situation as well. So that probably explains why this film was 3 hours. And for overall, I think this film was very good. I believe this film will definitely get nominated for many for Oscars if it does. Robert Downey Jr. and Cillian Murphy are definitely will probably get nominated. I would love to see Christopher Nolan get nominated again, even Ludwig Göransson as well. Like the music for Ludwig Göransson is so emotional. There's even a moment where Ludwig Göransson's music does go into a bit of a mind trip, where where it sounds like you're seeing different particles inside the particles of science and matter, and of course the physics side of things as well. If you know the music, if you know what I'm talking, if you know the moment that I'm talking about, like the moment is like the moment. It's the moment where it's like if it's played earlier on in the movie, like you hear that music from Ludwig Göransson, like I know people are probably gonna hear people do hear the depressing like music at the beginning, go into that whole um but it does go into that whole ordeal where some like where it does go into a bit of a whole quantum physics like moment, is which is basically called "Can You Hear the Music?" That is the name of the music of the moment. That is the name of the moment where "Can You Hear the Music?" where it goes into different directions of seeing particles of science and matter, even the quantum physics of it. You can actually, when you play this track, can you hear the music? You can listen to that with your eyes closed and envision the whole quantum physics of it. The fission, the fission track that is played in the beginning of the film, that is basically the emotional part of the movie. That is so emotional. And that was and that was used by and the string section played that moment. It's so emotional. Envisioning the horror and terror of the atomic bomb as well. And and he did a good job. Ludwig Göransson did a good job with the music for this movie. This is his second collaboration with Christopher Nolan, and I would love to see Ludwig Göransson write another score for another Christopher Nolan movie. Like Christopher Nolan did a fantastic job with this movie, and for everybody else involved with this movie, everybody else did a fantastic job as well. Robert Downey Jr. and Cillian Murphy. They did a fantastic job. Emily Blunt did a good job as well. Same with Florence Pugh. And of course, I know some of the supporting characters don't get that whole. I know, I know some of the supporting characters had minor roles, but I enjoyed Kenneth Branagh's role, including Rami Malek's role, Even Josh Peck. I was surprised Josh Peck was in this movie. Even even Alden Ehrenreich as well. Alden Ehrenreich, who played Han Solo in the Han Solo movie. He did a fantastic job as playing Louis Strauss's aide in this movie. Like he did a pretty good job. I know there were other cast members as well, but for what it's worth. Oh, and I also forgot to mention Matt Damon. Matt Damon as the general. He did a fantastic job. I really liked the moments between Oppenheimer and the general. Like Matt Damon and Cillian Murphy, they both did a fantastic job as well. Like Matt Damon really put up a good performance as the general for the role of the atomic bomb as well. But other than that, that's probably it. That's probably it. That's not much else to say about this movie. This movie was very good. I know everybody's gonna have different opinions about this film, and you know what? That's all right. I That's okay. I mean, I know now everybody's a history buff, but at the same time, this movie really is good. Can you imagine how different this movie would have been if it was not directed by Christopher Nolan? Can you imagine how different the Oppenheimer movie would have been without the direction of Christopher Nolan? I think I know the reason why the Oppenheimer movie did well. One, one of the main reasons is Christopher Nolan. Like Christopher Nolan. When you think of like you hear a name like Christopher Nolan, what do you think? What do you think of when it comes to Christopher Nolan? You think of the Dark Knight trilogy. You also think of Inception. You also think of Dunkirk, even Interstellar. Heck, Tenet as well. Even though Tenet is not Nolan's best work, but it was an okay, but it was one of his okay works. But you know, at the same time, he's a pretty big name, and he has done these films. He has become an acclaimed director, a critically acclaimed director, and he did a fantastic job with Oppenheimer. I mean, without Christopher Nolan, this film would have been different. This film would have been different without Christopher Nolan, and that's probably the reason why it did so well. And this was, and I know a lot of people are probably gonna say, well, I thought it was the story, I thought it was the cast. Yes, yes, or even the visuals, the music. Sure, yes, that too. But having Christopher Nolan on board on that, having Christopher Nolan on board really helped elevate the film, and of course, and of course the box office as well. It really did pretty. It is doing well at the box office to say, and overall, Oppenheimer is a very good film. Sure, it may be long, but at the same time, I enjoyed this film. I know a lot of people are going to enjoy this film, and you know, hey, they'll have different opinions on this, and that's totally fine. I understand that. But other than that, that wraps up my episode, and of course concludes the Codo Cinema Barbenheimer two-part special. So there you have it, folks. Now, what do you think of the Barbenheimer phenomenon? Did you thought it was did you thought it was fun? Did you thought it was a fun phenomenon? Do you think there might be another phenomenon in the future where two different movies competing against each other are going to come out on the same day? I would like to hear your thoughts if that's ever going to happen in the future. But under that, that wraps up this episode. And let me know, and if I'm missing out on anything from this movie, from the Oppenheimer movie, please let me know. Please let me know. Comment below if you are listening to this podcast, and if I'm missing out on some things from this episode. Comment below. Just comment below. But other than that, that wraps up this episode. Thank you all for tuning into Codo Cinema. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codo Man. Remember to watch movies and stay positive.